mental health and their children's education and care. Nearly half say that the COVID-19 pandemic negatively affected their ability to pay for basic needs like housing, utilities, and food. 4 in 10 report that it negatively affected their ability to do their job, and 43% say it has negatively impacted their mental health. The share reporting negative impacts on ability to pay for basic needs rises to over half among parents and men. Vietnamese respondents are more likely than Chinese respondents to report negative impacts on their ability to pay for basic needs and their ability to do their job, while Chinese respondents are more likely to report positive effects in these areas as well as on their mental health. That's interesting. Okay, over half of parents say the pandemic has negatively affected their children's education, and 41% say it has had negative impacts on their ability to care for their children. In contrast, 3 in 10 say the pandemic has positively impacted their children's education and their ability to care for their children. California Health Center respondents are more likely than those of other health centers to report positive impacts on their children's education and care, while other health center respondents are more likely than California Health Center respondents to report no impact on education or care. Sorry, sometimes it just he's reading these things, California Health Center respondents versus non-California healthcare respondents. It's just the same words over and over again. It's for some reason that's difficult. Many respondents say worry and stress related to the pandemic have affected their behavior and health in certain ways. Nearly half say it has affected their sleep and report changes in their appetite and eating. Others say it has led to frequent headaches or stomach aches, increased difficulty controlling temper, increased alcohol or drug use, and worsened chronic conditions like diabetes or high blood pressure. Adults under age 65 are more likely than those age 65 and older to report some of these effects, including frequent headaches or stomach aches, difficulty controlling temper, and increased alcohol and drug use. There were also some differences by location, with California Health Center respondents more likely to report these same effects, which may also reflect that they are more likely to be under age 65. Aha. 3 in 10 Asian Health Center respondents say they put off or went without health care in the past 12 months, and 37% of parents report doing so for their children. Among those who put off or went without health care for themselves, 42% say they did not seek health care because of concerns about exposure to coronavirus. Other factors include not being able to take time off work, 45%, and not being able to afford the cost, 31%, despite being patients of a community health center that provides free or low-cost care. Less than 1 in 10, 6%, say they went without care because they were concerned it would negatively affect their or a family member's immigration status. Adults under age 65 are more likely to say they put off or went without care than those age 65 and older. And a higher share of parents say they went without care than those without children in the home. Parents are more likely than those without children in the home to say they went without care because they couldn't take time off work or due to difficulty getting to an office or clinic, and less likely to cite concerns about exposure to coronavirus as a reason. California Health Center respondents are more likely than those at other centers to report putting off or going without health care for themselves and their children. These differences may reflect demographic differences. California Health Center respondents are more likely to be under age 65 and parents, as well as differences in social distancing policies across locations. Nearly 6 in 10 Asian Health Center respondents say they have worried at some point about being exposed to coronavirus. Overall, less than half say that they have ever been tested for coronavirus, but the share rises to 60% among those who say they have ever worried about exposure. Among those who worried they might have been exposed but were not tested, the main reasons they give for not getting tested are thinking they could isolate at home, 31%, or not knowing where to go to get tested, 26%. Some also report concerns about costs, 13%, and being told by a health professional they did not need to get tested, 13%. About 1 in 10 say they had concerns about effects on their ability to work or fears of negative effects on their family or on their or a family member's immigration status, even though the federal government has clarified that getting tested will not negatively affect immigration status. Concerns about ever being exposed to coronavirus are higher among adults under age 65, parents, and California Health Center respondents. Reflecting these increased worries, these groups are also more likely to report having received a COVID-19 test overall. There are no notable differences by age or parental status in the share who say they have received a test among those who ever worried about exposure. However, among those who say they have ever worried about exposure, California Health Center respondents are more likely to report being tested than those of other health centers. At the time of the survey, nearly 2/3 of respondents said they wanted to get a COVID-19 vaccine as soon as they can. About a quarter indicated they want to wait to see how it works for other people. Only 11% say they will only get the vaccine if required or definitely will not get it. Concerns about side effects, believing that the vaccine development process was rushed, and not believing they are at risk for getting seriously ill from the virus are the main reasons why people say they are not ready to be vaccinated. Broader data show that vaccine attitudes have shifted over the course of the vaccine rollout, with willingness to get a vaccine increasing across a number of groups. Conclusion. While these findings are not representative of Asian immigrants or Asian Health Center patients overall, they provide new insight into and understanding of the experiences of Asian Health Center patients who are largely immigrants, a group for whom there remain very little data. The findings illustrate the way Asian immigrants experience racism and discrimination in their daily lives and indicate that these experiences have increased amid the COVID-19 pandemic. They also suggest that immigration-related fears are ongoing among the community and contributing to reluctance accessing. Let me try that again. My mouth doesn't work very well sometimes. They also suggest that immigration-related fears are ongoing among the community and contributing to reluctance accessing government assistance programs for food, housing, and health care. The findings further show that the pandemic has taken a toll on mental health and well-being, finances, and access to health care for Asian immigrant families. This increased understanding can help inform COVID-19 response efforts as well as efforts to address health disparities more broadly. Going forward, continued efforts to assess and understand the experiences of smaller population groups, including Asian immigrants, remain important as they are often invisible in public data sources. So I thought that was pretty interesting. It was kind of a narrow field, much narrower field than I had anticipated going into it. I thought it would be a broader kind of survey, but it was kind of very certain specific groups in very specific places. But it was interesting, nevertheless, to get a sense of how people were reacting, and particularly how Asian immigrants were dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, given the heavy effort on the part of some individuals in a certain political party that I will not name at this moment, to kind of blame, to try to push blame aside for their own inaction and poor performance, and just say, well, it's China. China did this to us. It's their fault. And they in some cases, they were claiming that China did this on purpose, and others, they were just claiming that China did it by accident, or it's just blame them, and we should sue them, or, I don't know what. It was just a lot of nonsense mixed in with the usual hyperbole. But that makes an understanding of the Asian immigrant experience more necessary to see the effects of those kinds of things. And so we saw the effects of not only the previous administration's immigration policies and their immigration posturing, on how it affected the way Asian immigrants led their own lives and took care of their own health and housing and food situations, but also how those the kind of demonizing of Asian people generally created a great deal of problems for certain people. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. And so along that same line, here's another shorter poll. This is about, it's entitled Immigration and Border Security Remain Top Concerns of Texas Voters. So this is strictly a Texas poll done by the Texas Tribune. I don't know how reputable this pollster is, UTTT poll. But anyway, we'll just find out what people in Texas, or at least what the people who read the Texas Tribune or respond to the Texas Tribune, think about the immigration situation. Okay. With the Texas-Mexico border moving to central stage in national politics, Texas voters consider immigration and border security the most important problems facing the state, according to the latest University of Texas Tribune poll. Combine those topics at the top state-level concerns of 34% of all Texas voters and 59% of Republican voters in the state. Wait a minute. So Texas voters consider immigration and border security the most important problems facing the state. That is 34% of all Texas voters. I would not call that a majority. I'm not sure how they're getting the one from the other. Okay. Well, maybe this will clarify as it goes on. But if only 34% of Texas voters say this, then it is not the most important problems facing the state, because far less than half say that it is. Just because over half of Republicans say it is, that doesn't. Yeah. Okay. Anyway. I'm critiquing this even before I start reading it. Okay. Asked about the most important problems facing the United States, 16% of Texas voters chose political corruption/leadership, while 14% chose either immigration or border security. Another 8% chose the COVID-19 pandemic as the biggest threat. These sound like some pretty low numbers. The state's increasing racial and ethnic diversity is a cause for optimism, according to 37% of voters, down from the 48% who made the same assessment in a UTTT poll a year ago. It's a cause for concern, according to 34% of all voters, up slightly from the 31% with that sentiment a year earlier. Among Democrats, 55% called increasing diversity a cause for optimism, a view shared by 24% of Republicans. And while 28% of Democrats called increasing diversity a cause for concern, 40% of Republican voters did so. Not surprising. Governor Greg Abbott has pushed immigration and border security to the forefront of his concerns this year. The Republican who is running for re-election next year has repeatedly criticized President Joe Biden for the policies he's pushed since his term began early this year, and promised to end what Abbott describes as a Biden-created border crisis by finishing the wall that former President Donald Trump was trying to build between the U.S. and Mexico. In the April UTTT poll, 16% of voters identified immigration and border security combined as their top concerns, and another 16% felt the pandemic was of utmost importance. Those would seem to balance out to me. Among Republican voters, 25% named border security as the most important problem. Significant, but not as high as the strong majority who listed those as the top problems facing Texas. It reflects that this is becoming more of a Republican issue. Joshua Blank, Research Director for the Texas Politics Project. This also reflects UTTT polling from April that showed 39% of Texan voters felt that there are, quote, too many legal immigrants, and 51% felt that undocumented immigrants should be deported. Most Texas voters, 57%, disapprove of Biden's handling of border security and immigration. He has touted his immigration policies as a more humane approach to Trump's policies. They can't keep this issue at arm's length because it's causing them problems, Blank said. Among Republican voters, no surprise, 89% disapprove of Biden's handling of border issues, while 56% of Democrats said they approve of his policies. 18% disapprove. This is a stark difference from the ratings for Abbott. Only 37% disapprove of his border policies and 46% approve. Abbott announced his proposal to continue building a border wall with state and donated funds as the current poll entered the field. Sentiment on whether the country is on the right track has not changed from last month's poll, with 57% of voters saying that the country is headed in the wrong direction. This was especially prominent among Republicans, with 81% saying the U.S. is on the wrong track. Approximately 59% of independent voters shared the view. But when talking about the economy, 34% said the country is better off than it was a year ago. This sentiment was high among Democrats, with 62% holding this view. The state's economy is better than a year ago, according to 31% of voters. 28% said it's worse, and 32% said it's about the same. Okay. Urban voters had more favorable assessments of the state's economic situation than voters in suburban and rural Texas. It may just point to the fact that the economic recovery of COVID is just more apparent in these areas, Blank said. And almost half of voters, 49%, said they and their families are in about the same shape economically as they were a year ago. The rest were divided almost evenly between those who are better off, 23%, and those who said they are worse off than a year ago, 25%. Takes on the economy continued to be guided by voters' political leanings, with Biden stepping into office earlier this year. Although 40% of voters approve of Biden's handling of the economy, 47% disapprove. The partisan split is deep. 82% of Democrats approve of Biden's economic actions, while 84% of Republicans disapprove. The University of Texas Tribune Internet survey of 1,200 registered voters was conducted from June 10th through 21st and has an overall margin of error of plus minus 2.83 percentage points. So, yeah, I'm not really very surprised about any of that. Ow. Okay, let's see. We're getting near to the end here. I'll throw in this really quick. It's from Reuters. U.S. to expand work permits for immigrants who are crime victims. A new U.S. immigration policy announced on Monday will expand access to work permits and deportation relief to some immigrants who are crime victims while their visa cases are pending. USCIS, or U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, will create a process that could allow tens of thousands of applicants for U visas to receive work permits if their claims are deemed to be made in good faith and without the intention of defrauding the immigration system, the agency said. Reuters first reported the news earlier on Monday. Democratic President Joe Biden has pledged to make the U.S. immigration system more humane and has reversed many of the restrictionist policies of Republican former President Trump. Under Trump, U.S. immigration authorities made it easier to deport U visa applicants, drawing opposition from advocates for immigrants. The United States offers 10,000 U visas annually to immigrants who are victims of certain crimes and who aid law enforcement investigations or prosecutions. The visas provide access to a work permit and the ability to apply for permanent residence after 3 years, but high demand means applicants currently wait at least 5 years until they can receive work authorization. To qualify for a visa, applicants must be victims of domestic violence, trafficking, or other serious crimes. Certain family members of approved applicants also can request visas. The number of U visa applicants who will qualify for work permits under the new policy remains unclear. USCIS is currently considering nearly 269,000 U-Visa applicants, according to agency data current to December. However, not all of those applicants are in the United States, a USCIS spokesperson told Reuters. In a statement, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said the move would both help victims and promote public safety. These are individuals who have come forward to help law enforcement keep us all safe, but who are in need of a measure of protection for themselves as well. Seems like a reasonable thing. Okay. Here's one entitled, Citizenship for Undocumented Immigrants Would Boost U.S. Economic Growth. This kind of goes with something we were reading last week. Introduction and summary. This is very official. Today, 10.2 million undocumented immigrants are living and working in communities across the U.S. On average, they have lived in this country for 16 years and are parents, grandparents, and siblings to another 10.2 million family members. At the same time, it has been nearly 40 years since Congress has meaningfully reformed the U.S. immigration system, leaving a generation of individuals and their families vulnerable. Poll after poll has illustrated that the vast majority of Americans support putting undocumented immigrants on a pathway to citizenship. And as the nation emerges from the COVID-19 pandemic and looks toward the future, legalization is a key component of a just, equitable, and robust recovery. As the Biden administration and Congress craft their recovery legislation and consider how best to move the nation's policies toward a more fair, humane, and workable immigration system, the Center for American Progress and the University of California, Davis's Global Migration Center, modeled the economic impacts of several proposals that are currently before Congress. Using an aggregate macro growth simulation, I don't know what that is, the model illustrates the benefits to the whole nation from putting undocumented immigrants on a pathway to citizenship. Such legislation would increase productivity and wages, not just for those eligible for legalization, but for all American workers, create hundreds of thousands of jobs, and increase tax revenue. To help inform policymakers and advocates, this report looks at 4 potential scenarios where Congress grants a pathway to citizenship to all undocumented immigrants working in essential occupations, dreamers and those eligible for temporary protected status, and a combination of dreamers, those eligible for TPS, and essential workers. The report finds that during the next decade, Scenario 1, providing a pathway to citizenship for all undocumented immigrants in the United States would boost U.S. gross domestic product by a cumulative total of $1.7 trillion over 10 years and create 438,800 new jobs. 5 years after implementation, those eligible would earn annual wages that are $4,300 higher. 10 years after implementation, those annual wages would be $14,000 higher, and all other American workers would see their annual wages increase by $700. Scenario 2, providing a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants who are essential workers would boost the GDP by a cumulative total of $989 billion over 10 years and create 203,200 new jobs. 5 years after implementation, those eligible would experience annual wages that are $4,300 higher. 10 years after implementation, those annual wages would be $11,800 higher, and all other American workers would see their annual wages increase by $300. Scenario 3, enacting the American Dream and Promise Act, H.R. 6, would increase U.S. GDP by a cumulative total of $799 billion over 10 years and create 285,400 new jobs. 5 years after implementation, those eligible would experience annual wages that are, you guessed it, $4,300 higher. 10 years after implementation, those annual wages would be $16,800 higher, and all other American workers would see their annual wages increase by $400. Hey, I'll go for that. Scenario 4, providing a pathway to citizenship for HR 6 eligible and undocumented essential workers would boost the GDP by a cumulative total of 1.5 trillion over 10 years and create 400,800 new jobs. 5 years after implementation, I'll give you a guess. The annual wages would be how much? $4,300 higher. That's right. I don't know how you knew that. There must be amazing math with. 10 years after implementation, those annual wages would be $13,500 higher, and all other American workers would see their annual wages increase by $600. Importantly, this analysis considers only these direct economic benefits. The model does not capture the potentially large additional benefits to eligible immigrants' children in education, health, and future productivity gains, as these effects would take place likely more than 10 years from implementation. As the findings above show, creating a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants not only is the right thing to do, but also would be a substantial stimulus to the U.S. economy. Undocumented immigrants are critical to the nation's social infrastructure, a fact that has become even more widely understood amid the coronavirus pandemic. Across the country, they are building families and starting businesses. They are keeping hospitals open and functioning, and they are caring for America's loved ones. To that extent, legalization and a pathway to citizenship, which would raise wages for all workers, create hundreds of thousands of new jobs, and boost the GDP, is an investment in the country's infrastructure in and of itself. As the United States continues to address the coronavirus pandemic and works towards a just and equitable recovery, Congress must consider these proposals. This report begins with the parameters that the model uses when estimating the economic impact of legalization and a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. From there, it discusses the short-term implementation to 5 years and long-term, 5 to 10 years post-implementation, nature of the effects before presenting the simulation's economic effects for 4 scenarios protecting different subsets of undocumented immigrants. Okay, this is actually really long, and I'm really running out of time. So I'm going to pick this up next time. I'm going to quit while I'm ahead here. And I'll pick this up next time, and we'll just... so that was basically what I read was the introduction. And next we go to the actual model, how it is, how they figure out this stuff, and who all is eligible under these various scenarios, and how, just basically their conclusions on this. So I think this is interesting enough to read in full, and I'll get to it. This will have to be a multi-part series like it was before. But anyway, for the moment, I'm going to let you go and tell you that you've been listening to CU Immigration here on WRFU-LP Urbana, or UPTV, and that we come to you regularly, if not consistently, as consistently as I can manage, and that we'll be back as soon as next week. And until then, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.